And one of the wonderful things that we can do while we're in this situation with Zoom is to welcome special people that it's time for us to know. We've had quite a few. We've had all the Unity people on from the other centres. It's time now to welcome a very special one. I've been following him for quite some time, and it's a lot of fun, but with great depth in everything he does. He's a licensed Unity teacher, and he's from Reflections of Truth in Brisbane. Would you welcome, first time, Julian Harvey. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. So I'll just confirm everybody can hear me properly. Excellent. So thank you, Bill, for inviting me to talk at Unity of Melbourne. It's been a long time since I've visited Unity of Melbourne. Seems like forever. So it's nice to sort of be with you guys in this electronic way. So it's interesting Rad had his issues this morning with the sound, because my talk today is called "It's No Good Being No Good." And some of you might be questioning, why would a Unity person be talking about not being good? And it comes from the human side of my ego when I talk about this. A while back, I do what Rad does for Unity Reflections of Truth. I do all the IT, I do the PowerPoints, I put together the talks, the aspects of that for Rhonda, who's the minister up there. And probably similar to you guys down there, I've had real struggles with getting around the technology of Zoom, the technology of getting the music to sound right, getting the PowerPoints to play properly, and so on and so forth. And I got into a bit of a rhythm last year, and over this last few months I got quite into a rhythm of getting that sorted out reasonably well. And then I had 3 weeks in a row where I could not work it out. I could not work out what was going wrong, where the problems were, and what the challenges I was having. And we had the lovely Reverend Phyllis Grace from Adelaide doing a talk for us, and it was a nightmare. It was a complete disaster from my side of the fence. On her side of the fence it was fine. She gave a great talk, but the problem is that we could hear her, she couldn't hear us, including she couldn't see, the PowerPoints didn't work properly, the sound didn't work properly, and it was quite a challenging day. And I slipped into the human side of my ego base. So as we know, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and trust me, in the middle of all of that I went right into my humanness. And what I did was all that negative, self-defeating, damaging, self-damaging language in my head went on, and for the first time ever I completely lost my cool at a Unity service, and luckily it was before, I was really struggling, and before the service I was really struggling, and it got to the point stage where we were about 10 or 15 minutes into the service time, and I took a walk outside. I went outside, I just left it. And in that moment I had this realization that I was being no good to myself. And by being no good, I was being no good to the people that I was trying to serve, the Unity family. And that's when I realized that being no good is no good, and we have to work on that. So I looked at, how do I go from being overwhelmed, because I was overwhelmed with what was going on, and I was in that framework in my mind of completely in that spiral, that spiral staircase down to the depths of the negative side of my ego feelings. And I thought, well, how do I go from overwhelmed to overcome? Now, to be honest with you, I didn't do it at the time of the service. I thought about this afterwards, and what came to mind was the biblical story of David and Goliath. Now, I know a lot of you know the story of David and Goliath, and it's one of my favourite stories because it meets and fits so many options and so many things that happens to me as a person on the day-to-day basis, circumstance to circumstances. So, as you know, with David and Goliath, Goliath was the giant on the opposition team, and David was the hero of our story. And he was there was a sort of a call for somebody to go out and to kill Goliath, and David kind of thought about it, but David needed to find out what the deal was, and so he went to the king and he said, what's the deal? And of course, as you know, the offer that was on the table for anybody who was willing to go out and face Goliath and attempt to kill him was half the kingdom and one of his daughters in marriage. So that sounded like a fair deal to David. He felt that, yep, this is what I need to do and this is where I need to go. And he went out and then he looked at Goliath. And then he went, hang on a second. And then he went back to the king and he actually went and checked out the princess to make sure she was worth it. And she was. So he went, okay, the money be nice, but I'll do it for the girl. So he went out there and he faced Goliath. But what he did was he put on his armour before he went out to fight Goliath. And he took out his armour, and his armour for him was his sling and 5 stones. That was his weapon of choice, if you want to put it in those terminologies, to go out and to confront Goliath. So, because we're a practical metaphysical organisation, metaphysically, Goliath is any of those challenges that at the moment or at that time is overwhelming for us. Now, those Goliaths can be facing major medical issues or facing major job loss issues. But the Goliath can also be those old behaviours, those old patterns of behaving, those old thought patterns that come up and face us on a daily basis. So we need to look at what is our Goliath. What are we actually facing on a day-to-day basis? And in the moment when I was in Phyllis's talk, my Goliath was my inability to focus and to reduce my stress and to reduce my angst at wanting to do the best job I could and not being able to move beyond my negative thoughts. So my Goliath was my own negative thoughts. So as David did, I had to think about, well, David is that part of me and my weaponry is that part of me that is the internal aspect of myself that can defeat and can defend myself against those negative self-beliefs. So what I realized and what David realized is that being no good is no good, and that I need some form or some fashion of assistance to help me move forward. Now with David, it was the keeping his eyes on the prizes, and the prizes were the riches of the kingdom and love. And so it's that wealth and love of being in the oneness that was his guide to moving forward. One of the things I do need to say, because I think it's really important to understand that that when we're in that moment, for me anyway, when I'm in that moment, I tend to then start a beat up on myself about, oh, hang on, I'm not supposed to be this way. I'm supposed to have done this. I'm supposed to have done that. And I don't know whether you know, the 11th commandment is thou shalt not should on thyself. And so I say I should know better. I should be able to do better. I should be able to do this. And so there's a lot of shoulding going on. But I also have to recognize that in that moment I'm not okay. And that it's okay to not be okay in that moment. I have to acknowledge the human side of who I am as part of my learning process, and the guide that I have within me as to what spiritual gifts do I need to incorporate, what spiritual understanding about myself, and developing a better depth of understanding of who I am as a person. So I had to recognize that I was not okay, and that I was in overwhelm, and that it's okay to be in that state, but I needed to recognize that before I could move on. So, like I say, it's okay to be unsettled. It's what do I do with it next? So what is our tools and what is in our armory to help us with that? And that's where I come down to the learnings that I got from Unity, and I've been in Unity for a long time now. And it's those processes. So when everything fell apart on that day, the first thing I did was I got myself out of the space I was in and into a quiet space. I.e., I went outside into nature and outside the building. I said my apologies to the people in the room and said I need a minute. So I recognised that I needed to take time out, and I honoured myself for my own need for what I needed at that time. And I stepped out into a quiet space for me. And then I used the 12 powers. And the first of the 12 powers I invoked was illumination and understanding. I illumined within myself the frustration and the anger and the fear of letting people down and a whole bunch of stuff, but I brought to light the actual problem that was going on. I illumined my understanding that I was in that spiral of that human negative space, and I needed to be aware of that. And I gave myself an understanding and used my power of understanding to recognize that that's okay. I understand what's going on, which gave me a framework to move on to the next power that I invoked. I invoked the power of faith. I recognized within myself and remembered to connect with my oneness, and that oneness was in charge. The divine was in charge, and I needed to be present and become aware of that oneness everywhere present. So then I had to invoke discernment. I had to use my power of judgment to change my thoughts. I had to very specifically go, I understand that that's where I'm coming from, but I need to change my thoughts so that I can go back into the room and do what I need to do to solve the problem. I then needed to use the powers of will, again combined with understanding, but I needed to be willing to do the work to change my thoughts. And so I used affirmations to invoke what I really wanted to do, which was, I am divinely inspired to solve all. I am divinely inspired to understand. The divine within me does the work. It is not me, but the divine within me expressing as me that does the work. Now, did I solve the problem when I went back in? No, I didn't. But what I did do was I went back in and I said, all right, this doesn't seem to be working. Let's find a different way of doing the service today. We could hear Reverend Grace, Phyllis Grace, on the Zoom, and the people on Zoom could hear her. So the only thing that had changed was I was no longer in charge. I could let go, and I could let the service be the service it was supposed to be. Now, to be honest with you, I didn't hear a lot of the service because I was doing a lot of inner work on myself. However, when the service came to an end, everybody on the Zoom and the people who were at the Bajai said it was a great service. Reverend Grace, Reverend Phyllis told gave a great service, and she gave a great talk, and everybody got a lot out of it. And in fact, the people on Zoom did a lot of talking and a lot of chatting after the Zoom, and everybody in the Bajai did the same thing. So what I learnt from that experience is that Spirit was in charge. The service that needed to happen on that day was that service. And that in fact, my being no good in my own mind was no good for that service. I needed to step back. And so I learnt from that being no good is no good, but I have the tools to change. I have the tools to move forward in my life, and I have the learnings through unity of how to express myself and learn to move through any challenges that I might have. So I'm sure, because we're all living a human experience, you have challenges in your life. And I'm sure that those challenges at times become overwhelming. So if you can remember one thing from today's talk is that it's no good to be no good, and it's okay to be not okay, but you have the tools, you have the armor within you to solve the problem, to move beyond what's going on within or without you. And for that, we are very grateful. And so it is. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Julian. That was wonderful. We needed to hear that, didn't we?